Welcome everyone. This is the launch of our What's in Store Part 2 report on creating an enabling environment for the deployment of grid batteries in South Africa. Before we start with the program today, there are some general housekeeping announcements. This webinar will be recorded, and those who registered for the webinar will receive a link to the recording. Please use the Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom window to post any questions. We will add written responses to some of the questions during the panel discussion, and we will also use the Q&A function for audience questions to be posed to the panel in the open discussion session later. I will hand over to my colleague Richard Halsey now, who will give a summary of the report findings. Richard is a policy advisor for the South Africa Energy team at ISD and has been working on energy and climate change topics in South Africa for the last 12 years. Over to you, Richard.
All right, good morning, everyone. We're getting started promptly. Hopefully there were a lot of people who registered, so we're expecting more to still come in. Let me just get my presentation. Can I just check that everyone is able to see that and you're able to hear me?
All good.
All right. Okay, so what we're doing today, we're looking through the latest report that we are releasing today. Just to take a step back, this is the second in a two-part series. The first part looked at the overall benefits of energy storage in a constrained power system and explained how batteries offer a range of services and can be viewed as a strategic priority in South Africa. So as such, part two, which is what we're focusing on today, is only looking at grid batteries. It's not a comparison between batteries and other technologies. It's just looking at how should we approach batteries in South Africa. And it assumes some of the concepts from part one are understood. You know, what are ancillary services? How do batteries help with the existing grid, and etc. And just a quick one so that we're all on the same page. What batteries are we talking about? Batteries can be described by where they are located in the energy system. So we are talking about what are often technically termed front-of-the-meter batteries, but in terms of easy communication, we're calling them grid batteries because they are located on the grid, whether it's on the distribution or the transmission network or at the generation facilities themselves. And their primary function is to support the grid or grid supply of electricity. If we look at some international trends, we do need to bear in mind pumped storage is the biggest player with the most capacity, but batteries are where the action is currently happening, and that's one of the reasons we are focusing on them. And you know, a little bit from our part one, you know, there's a lot of ways that grid-located batteries can help the grid and public supply of electricity, but there isn't really much momentum for them yet in South Africa. Now, why do we say that? Well, Eskom has a phase one battery program. Batteries are also included by some projects in the risk mitigation program. There is storage, which has come out from the Integrated Resource Plan as a tender for batteries. And the first vanadium redox flow battery has actually been built in South Africa almost a year ago, but it's still not connected to the grid. So although there are all these projects, they have been delayed and in some cases by several years. So we're looking at how we can increase momentum on this. Some other countries like, well, in this case, states, South Australia and California, they have really been ramping up on batteries. And there are some lessons that can be learned, but one has to be careful that they are location specific. Not everything that worked there will work in South Africa. Some of the strategies that will be transferable to South Africa is clear government commitment to renewables and storage, looking at finance and access to multiple revenue streams, which we'll get to later. Now, there's been a lot of existing work specifically for South Africa. Here's some examples. Also on the right-hand side, the African Continental Master Plan has battery work. There's been significant work on value chains as well, both for lithium ion and for vanadium. And those two technologies are the main ones we're looking at. So we are not trying to reinvent the wheel with existing work. Our report focused on interview responses, and the key questions were, what are the main challenges for deployment and how would you solve these? So just a tiny bit on the methodology. All the interviews were anonymous, so no one in our report is quoted or named. There were over 70 stakeholders from a wide range of angles. Again, we list the sort of where they were from. And just a few disclaimers. I'm only touching on a few topics here, otherwise I'll take up the whole session. There are more in the report, and there's even more that we couldn't fit into the report. Also, people with a lot of experience also had quite different views on certain topics, and we've tried to focus on the ones where there was some consensus. And importantly, don't shoot the messenger. My job here is to cover in a summary way, what I was told during all the interviews. So the first one, which seems like such a basic finding, but it was in a lot of interview responses, was there is insufficient understanding and awareness around grid batteries. Now, this covered a range of levels from government, finance, the general public. And there were several reasons for this. Batteries are a new and evolving technology. They're a bit different from what we've got currently in the system. Sometimes it's about the tools and software or human resources. And all of this has led to, in some cases, an underestimation of what batteries can do, and on the other end, sometimes an overestimation of what batteries can do. Examples included, what are the opportunities for municipalities? How exactly you fit batteries in the modeling? What are their realistic capabilities on the ground, not just on paper, like when they are in the system, how do they work? And how do they fit into the regulations? So the action here just seems to be a general need for more information and knowledge sharing about batteries. Now, the second concern in interviews was around costs. I often heard batteries are still expensive. Now, this is quite interesting given the context. If we look here at the lithium-ion international prices, they've dropped enormously. They did go up in 2022 due to COVID supply chains, but they are now at the lowest they've ever been. And yet, everyone was still concerned about cost. So if we look at this a bit more, here is a breakdown of, say, a 60 megawatt lithium-ion battery at 4-hour duration. So if you look at how the costs are split, where are areas that you can try and reduce costs? One of them is duration itself. It might be better to buy a 6-hour battery because your per kilowatt hour cost will come down. But it's a bit like buying milk in a supermarket. If you buy a higher volume, your unit price goes down, but you have to spend more upfront. But the blue bit down here, if you can see my cursor, the battery itself is the biggest cost. So what about your specifications? Are you ordering a Rolls-Royce when something slightly less expensive could work? So there are ways to potentially look at reducing costs. In the longer term, is it possible in South Africa to build the cells and produce them ourselves? There's some debate around that. Can we compete with China? These are all things we need to think about. But discussions around costs often came to what is the value? Now, if you look at the metric levelized cost of storage, which hopefully people are familiar with, your total lifetime cost divided by the amount of electricity or energy you get out. The problem with this metric is you miss a lot of the potential values, such as deferring grid investment, and you miss some of the services that you could get paid for. There are people, and some of them are interviewed, who are working on a levelized value of storage, which is a new metric. And if we don't need to go through this diagram in detail, but the point here is that there's lots of areas where battery can add value. For example, down here in the green, a municipality might save money on diesel. It might have less fines for exceeding demand limits, but none of that is captured by levelized cost of storage, which only looks at a subset of the benefits. So basically, evaluating the economics of grid batteries simply by capital cost or levelized cost of storage is not the full picture and doesn't contribute the value add to the system. So the action here seems to be, firstly, to identify how can you reduce costs but still maintain the quality and standards, but then look at how to recognize the value and shift the thinking around batteries towards value and not just cost. A major concern, particularly with developers, was around revenue stacking. This is where a single facility can derive income from multiple grid services. There were many responses like, we don't have enough opportunity to do it at present, and this makes it harder for business models, etc. What was less clear in interviews is what exactly do you do about this? Where are the levers? Is it new markets? What do you do about regulations, etc.? So the action here seems to be around stakeholder collaboration to identify how to deal with revenue stacking. Some examples are you could better align the services section in the system operator grid code with what energy storage can provide. That is one specific one, but there are potentially lots of others. Now, another concern, particularly with developers, was around tariffs. If you are charging your battery and you have to pay an Eskom tariff, which would be in the case, say, of a municipality, there isn't any price certainty for what it's going to cost to charge. For example, as in the picture in 2023, Eskom's price increase was 9.6. In 2024, it was 18. So developers are concerned about this as it's a large part of their costs. Wheeling is another one. There's not a national framework yet for tariffs. There's also concerns around how we build. Is it a credit? How does this all work? In terms of when the battery discharges, there's ongoing debates around how Eskom can get cost-reflective tariffs. Will other customer groups, such as residential, start to pay time of use? So these are all uncertainties. And in terms of ancillary services and other services, if there are new markets developed, who's going to set the tariffs, how they're going to be regulated. So basically, there's a whole lot of work around tariffs that needs to be done. Another concern which came up in a lot of interviews was around plans not aligning and also in modeling. If you look at independent power system models published since 2020, the range of battery allocation to 2030 is huge. It's from 0 to 18 gigawatts. So there's not really a consensus yet as to how many or what capacity of batteries we need, and also what duration, so the total amount of energy storage. Then if we look specifically at the Integrated Resource Plan and Eskom's Transmission Development Plan, if we look just at the more recent one, because these two are comparable, the IRP 2023 and the Transmission Development Plan 2022 came out at the same time, essentially, but Eskom's TDP includes benefit, the analysis is, how many batteries do we need that will help the grid function well? And this amount is a lot higher than what's in the current IRP. So if procurement continues as per the IRP, we could end up in a situation where Eskom doesn't get the amount of batteries they have determined is optimal for the transmission network. So the action here seems to be, again, a stronger feedback between these two planning processes so that you get the right allocation of batteries in the end. The second last one, and then we'll wrap up, is around transparency. I had at least one developer say to me, look, if we had more transmission system data, we could use that to work out what projects could get more out of existing infrastructure while still complying with the redundancy and safety features, and that in other parts of the world, this information is available. The battery tender documents, like me as a researcher, you can't access them unless you pay 25,000 Rand. And also within the IRP modeling, it's not entirely clear how batteries have been handled, are hybrid facilities considered, etc. So the action here seems to be about increased and free access to the relevant information and also for open source modeling. The last section is around laws and regulations. This is just one example. We cover a bunch of other laws and regulations, but most people were concerned about the Electricity Regulation Amendment Bill. It's meant to provide for an open market for competitive electricity trading, but there is no definition, clarity, or classification around energy storage. And other than indicating a lack of political priority on the issue, there are other implications because storage is classified as a generator by default, even though it's a net consumer of energy, and some of your network advantages are overlooked. And then this just generally results in a downstream, some confusion around how it fits in with other regulations. So the action here would be to include energy storage in the Electricity Regulation Act. Could be difficult now that it's essentially been passed, but this was still the sentiments of people I interviewed, and obviously in other regulations, energy storage needs to feature. So what we're trying to do, again, there's lots else in the report. We've tried to sum some of these up into 3 objectives and how these actions can meet objectives. The first one is to improve planning and decision-making. So if you can establish platforms for people to work together on these, that will obviously help, because a lot of the concerns is that there's been disjoint planning processes resulting in plans that don't align. The second one is recognizing the need for knowledge sharing and access to information. And a lot of this just came out because people don't think there is enough awareness at the moment. And the third one is the majority of people are interviewed only focused on economic issues, and we can't forget about some of the environmental and sustainability issues. We've got a whole chapter in the report about that, which I haven't covered today. And the second and third one can all feed back into these collaborative planning platforms. The second one is around how is it that you can improve revenue stacking? There's a whole lot. Firstly, working out how much you're actually going to get paid for your services as a battery operator. That is obviously need to be discussions with Eskom and others. Then developing a market for the services. Points 3 and 4 here are around getting energy storage more into the regulations and the grid codes, and then working out the wheeling tariffs. Or the wheeling model, and then the tariffs for wheeling will be included under point 6 here, all those other tariffs we talked about. Now, if you do all of that and battery operators can access revenue stacking, it improves their business model, improves access to finance and access to capital. And then the very last one is around supporting immediate local value chain opportunities. We basically just looked at lithium ion and vanadium redox flow, which is what a lot of the other studies in South Africa have done. If we can finalize and implement SAREM here, which is a South African Renewable Energy Master Plan, a lot of work has been done around increasing battery assembly and component manufacture. So that's immediate opportunity. There is also a critical and/or battery minerals master plan under development. So if we can expedite those, then we could get to minerals beneficiation sooner. And if national procurement caters for long-term storage, which has currently been difficult for batteries such as vanadium redox flow to compete in the current tender, then that can help with the vanadium value chain, because you need local demand for those grid batteries, because they can't be used, they're not used in mobile applications like EVs. So that's a summary from me. And this is very high level. And then with the panel session, which we're moving into, we can dig into some of these issues in a lot more detail.
Thanks, Richard. That was a fantastic overview of the report, and congratulations on its launch. I see there are some attendees who I think started raising hands. So I would just encourage you to maybe use the Q&A chat for now to ask any questions that you may have, and we'll come to them towards the end of our discussion once we're through with the panel discussion. So I think Richard has set a really good context in terms of the overview of the kind of topics that we wanted to discuss today with our panel discussion. So it's a neat segue into the discussion. But before I begin, I would like to remind all our participants that this discussion is being conducted in the spirit of collaboration and problem solving, to identify not only the existing challenges, but also collectively explore the opportunities that lie ahead for further market development of grid batteries in South Africa. For the discussion, we will be doing 2 rounds of questions, and I request our esteemed and vibrant panel to limit their interventions to a maximum of 3 minutes per answer. And as the discussion gets interesting, my colleagues here will be helping us keep track of time. With that, I would like to invite our first panelist, Sherwin Harris. Sherwin is the Chief Executive Officer of Oya Energy, a state-of-the-art hybrid energy project currently under construction, which includes 155 megawatts of solar PV, 86 megawatts of wind, and 92 megawatts of battery energy storage. He has led large business transactions in renewable energy storage, and petrochemicals, having worked for ENGIE, General Electric, and Sasol. He's also on the board of the South African Energy Storage Association. Welcome, Sherwin. The first question that I wanted to raise to you was that a main theme from our research was on how BESS can access multiple revenue streams, something that Richard also alluded to in his presentation. Our interviewees generally showed concern about this, but it was less clear on how to solve this, both within the current framework and how to improve the framework. So I wanted to get your thoughts on this based on your experience developing projects and your experience at the Energy Storage Association. Over to you, Shobhan.
Thanks, Swasti, and good morning to everyone on the call, and thank you for making the time for this interesting and quite important topic of battery energy storage that we are starting to see a lot of increase in our markets. And so APTAN, so I thank ISD for the work they've done and for setting this up. Swasti, important question. So I think that we see battery energy storage systems starting to access multiple revenue streams, like Richard has says, in terms of revenue stacking. But the current framework and the current market framework does pose challenges that require strategic solutions, as you mentioned. The main concerns around these revenue streams revolve around the current economic landscape, and I'll talk more about that, the regulatory frameworks and technological limitations. However, we are starting to see opportunities emerge as we've seen in terms of the Eskom project, risk mitigation and others, and the IPPO rounds, and market conditions evolving. So if we look at the current framework and solutions, so today, and putting my NG hat on, we see lots of solutions, so lots of opportunities within the current framework in energy arbitrage, ancillary services, and resource capacity or adequacy. So in energy arbitrage, and we're starting to see a lot more in South Africa coming on play where energy storage systems, battery energy storage systems are being used to store energy during periods of low demand and low prices and discharge it during peak demand when prices are higher. This is an attractive option for BESS operators, especially in regions with significant price fluctuations. Traditionally, BESS was always used for auxiliary services, so we continue to see projects in our markets around regulation, spinning reserves, reactive power, voltage control, black start capabilities, and the like. These services are essential for maintaining grid stability and can be a reliable source of revenue, especially as we start to see fossil fuel power plants starting to be decommissioned and taken offline. As in the case of Oya, resource capacity and adequacy, for payments where we receive payments for ensuring the availability of resources during critical periods can be a stable revenue stream. And I think we'll start to see a lot more of that in South Africa as traders start to come online and start to balance out the energy portfolios. Different markets have their own capacity payment mechanisms and which BESS systems can tap into. So the next part you asked, Swasti, is how do we improve the framework, right? So, and a key part of that is policy and regulation, which has been touched on. There needs to be an alignment of policies and regulation to facilitate BESS integration. This includes adapting regulatory measures that recognize the value of storage in both capacity and auxiliary service markets and future opportunities. Market design, it's important that as we design our grid and market systems, that we be conscious and deliberate to accommodate the capabilities of BESS, such as their fast response times and the ability to provide multiple revenue streams that will help unlock more revenue streams. So, for example, allowing BESS to participate in frequency response and capacity markets simultaneously, and also monetizing other revenue streams or capabilities or use cases increases the revenue potential. Technology integration is the last one. As technology progresses, the capabilities of BESS will expand, and we're starting to see that today, allowing for even more diverse applications and revenue streams. So continued investment in R&D to improve efficiency and reduce costs will enhance the economic viability of BESS. I mean, we'll start to see a lot more in the future integration with renewables. So we're starting to see the first use cases now in risk mitigation with two projects being three technology, PV, wind, and BESS, and further projects in terms of PV and BESS, both in state auctions as well as private or corporate PPAs. So I think as best systems technology starts to increase, costs start to drop, we'll start to see a lot more integration with renewables, and I think we'll also start to see a lot more decentralized generation come on play. Hope that answers your questions, Vasti.
It does, and that's really helpful for sure. I think what the points that you mentioned on the adoption of RE increasing and then the hybrid solutioning that can then be clubbed with BESS, it's pretty interesting because that can be a major lever for bringing the cost down. Given you mentioned that, actually, I would like to bring in Monde Soni, our next panelist. Monde is a chief engineer at Eskom, specializing with battery energy storage systems, microgrids, and independent power producer integration. He is also the chairman of the South African Institute of Electrical Engineers Power and Energy section. Monde, just building on, I think, what Sherwin mentioned, you lie at the heart of addressing some of the technical challenges around integration. So the question that I wanted to ask you was that grid batteries can offer a range of benefits to the grid that we're already talking about. But then there can be some technical challenges with incorporating them into existing systems. In your experience, what have you found to be the main integration or implementation challenges, and what can be done to address these? Over to you, and welcome to the discussion.
Okay, thanks, Program Director. Good morning, everyone. I agree with the previous speaker on a lot of aspects that were touched, and I think what I'm just going to bring to the fore is just a few things. The first one being batteries are more like a property business. It's location, location, location. So location is extremely important, where you put it on the grid. And that can then have implications in terms of what you can derive or what kind of services you can derive from the battery. I think you may have seen in the recent bids that are driven by the IPP office that you will find that each bid gets focused in a certain specific area. And that is exactly to ensure that the most suitable area that will assist the grid is selected. So, but over and above that, one of the issues, and unfortunately, the question is more on challenges. So I'm not really going to talk about the nice things. So I'm just going to talk about the challenges themselves. So the issues around the grid strength, because as much as we are deploying batteries, there is a ceiling that we quickly reach in different areas based on the grid strength. And what that means is, for example, the grid right now requires and is still going to require more and more ancillary services. And now the system operator has actually even started to look at the fast frequency response. And this is due to the intermittency of the renewables that we have on the grid. And a battery becomes, very, very suitable, the most suitable tool to actually assist the grid in that regard. However, the operation of the battery, meaning that within milliseconds you need it to ramp from 0 to its capacity, that has implications in terms of what happens in the local network. It has implications in terms of what we call rapid voltage change. So, which means that you could cause unintended problems. So the grid strength is one thing. And then added to the grid strength is also we have quickly learned that batteries, again, going back to the location, the batteries don't go very well with wind generation resource. They are not optimally placed when you place them in the area that's got a high wind generation resource. And that's mainly because wind is not as predictable as the sun, and also wind can go for 12 hours or even more, just generating. And then in such areas, you find that it's actually better to use a curtailment method to actually control what goes into the grid, and also the corridor constraints. So now we have quickly learned that it's better to put it in areas where you've got better solar resource. And I think maybe the last one for this round of questions will be now the technology advancements. Our networks, especially if you look at areas like your Cape areas, you find that we've got long networks, long radial networks, and we have lower fault levels. And we are aware of the grid forming technology. However, the technological advancements in terms of the grid forming technology being ready to be deployed en masse, that is what remains to be a question at this point. So thanks, Chair. I will end it there for now.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for highlighting those challenges. We'll come back to a discussion on opportunities as well in the second round, but these were really helpful. And I think the co-location point that you made is just fantastic. I'd like to bring our third panelist in at this stage. Bhaskaran Bandyar is an electrical engineer with experience in both the private and public sector. Since 2022, he has been the head of green energy within the Sustainable Energy Markets Department at the City of Cape Town. In this role, his focus is on the front-end development of generation projects and technology pilots. Bash, on paper, there are a variety of ways grid batteries could help at municipal level with load shedding. But in reality, things aren't always so simple. Can you talk us through some of the challenges of using grid batteries for load shedding mitigation based on the work that City of Cape Town particularly has done? Over to you, Bash, and welcome again to the panel discussion.
Hi, Swashi. Thanks for having me, and welcome to all the attendees. Yes, it's quite a good question. It's a complex one, but let me try to touch on some of the salient points. So there are a few issues that distinguish investments in the private sector from that of the public sector. One of the fundamental things is that, unlike a private sector investment where that project itself needs to just sort of finance its achieve its financial objectives in isolation, and only to benefit maybe a segment or that exact facility of which it's connected to. When it's connected within the municipal network, the idea is that it needs to sort of service the entire network, because the cost in our revenue stream is spread across all our customers. So if we had a intense capital investment like a battery energy storage facility located perhaps at one substation or one area in the network, we wouldn't be allowed to afford that area some sort of load shedding, or how could I say, exemptions. So the regulations don't allow us to exempt segments of the network from load shedding. So even in theory, if you had a battery system that's large enough to support an entire node of the network, we wouldn't be able to insulate them from load shedding because the regulations wouldn't allow that. And it also, customers would be quite aggrieved if that cost of that investment is spread across all consumers, but not all consumers are benefiting in an equal manner. So the only way to do that would be to really scale the best deployment in such a manner that it can achieve this sort of system-wide load shedding mitigation effort. So you need this sort of like a hive intelligence where you could control all the battery systems in synergy. So you would have to have several of these distributed in our network, such that it interfaces with most of our main accounts, or even better, at each of our points of delivery from Eskom. That would be, a more optimal way of actually getting load shedding in the most equitable manner. However, this would require like massive funding, and you need a very strong business case. But even if that was present, you'd have the challenge of project managing that and doing the actual engineering construction of that, which is quite a technically complex thing in itself. So even if we were to achieve this, though, and we had this several battery systems deployed strategically in the network, how would we achieve load shedding mitigation in a effective manner? Because Eskom requires you to curtail your load against a predictable load profile, right? That's their response to match the generation availability by curtailing curtailing your load. Now we could do that using batteries in theory. So instead of curtailing a load, we discharge our batteries during those windows of which load shedding is required. However, that would mean that we'd also have to charge those batteries at some point. And we wouldn't be able to charge them during those load shedding events. So if load shedding is pervasive or is at a certain level of intensity, you might not get that window of opportunity to charge. So there are ways of dealing with that. You could cleverly control or stagger your charging such that it falls in hours, perhaps where you would be willing to load shed more intensely to allow for that charging load to be placed onto the Eskom, or the way Eskom would see it, part of our load profile. However, it would mean you'd be affecting our load shedding schedule. And if load shedding sort of changes and the batteries are at a certain state of charge and now load shedding takes inception, can you guarantee that schedule wouldn't have to, shift halfway in a time slot? So to get that predictability for Eskom to see a response to their request reliably, and for us to also control our load shedding regime in a sensible and non-erratic manner, that is quite a difficult combination of things that have to sort of come together. But that said, we cannot say that we can't take some steps to introducing battery storage, because there's definitely some merits for it, as has been spoken about. There's a whole lot of use cases and stacked benefits that could be derived from battery storage. And us as a municipality sitting between Eskom and the customers, we kind of share in both the benefits that a battery system would afford us, right? Whether it's a sort of closer to what behind the meter would be, and some of the benefits that other customers see in front of the meter. So how we set out to do that is to note that we have a situation where load shedding is unpredictable. So we don't know what the load shedding will look like in the future. There's the uncertainty about the tariff structure going from mega flex, and changing the time of use periods might even erode the arbitrage opportunities. And but at the same time, we want to create this huge investment that will last for 10 or 15 years into the future, if not longer, depending on what level of augmentation we want to consider. So what we did is we had to look at several points in the network and find the sites where there's the lowest risk, right? So where there are the highest opportunities for investment deferral, potential critical sensitive loads that we could implement some sort of load shedding, afford some sort of load shedding exemptions, if you will, if the regulations permit, and at the same time service the network for other ancillary services that it might require. So finding those were quite a delicate balance, because you need to kind of use a sort of a multiple hurdle approach, where you look at all the different sites in the network and you find the ones that have that combination of use cases, so that we could pivot. So if load shedding sort of ramps down, that we have other use cases for the battery, because otherwise it would very quickly become a stranded asset. So it's a very complicated thing for us, and our approach right now is only to use a phased methodology for rolling it out, and sort of hedging ourselves against these different futures.
Thanks, Sash. It's quite fascinating. I mean, I think sometimes we just often don't get to hear these ground realities and challenges and hurdles that come up at the municipal level. So thanks for sharing that. And that was really interesting in terms of the regulatory reforms that will be needed to be able to even think about scale. At this stage, I would like to introduce our fourth panelist, Vincencia. Vincencia Leitek is an executive in the power sector at Standard Bank. She has been at Standard Bank for 15 years, focused on project financing across energy and infrastructure projects. including the Renewable Energy Independent Power Producer Procurement Program rounds and the recently launched Energy Storage Independent Power Producer Procurement Program with windows. Given we're talking, and I think Bash also alluded to this, the massive investments that will be needed. Vincentia, for you, we wanted to understand your experience at the Standard Bank. Since Standard Bank has supported all the projects in the first window of the Battery Energy Storage Independent Power Producer Procurement Program, what do you think are the most important lessons from this first of its kind process in South Africa in terms of financing? And what are some of the major risks that then need to be addressed within that? Over to you, Vincentia, and again, welcome to the panel.
Very much, Swasti, and good morning, everybody. So, yes, so I agree with you. Standard Bank has been involved in numerous of the utility scale batteries which have been financed. So starting with the RMI-PPP program, the hybrid battery and PV, and the project that we financed is actually in operations. It was a very large project in Kinnock. And we are also financing all of the 5 preferred bidders from round 1 of the energy storage program. So a lot of sort of lessons and a lot of need for us as a bank to get around the new concept of financing utility scale batteries. Obviously, we have been involved in all of the previous renewable energy, PV, wind projects, but this is a different type of financing, different type of risks. And so a lot of work was required in order to get up the speed and up the curve, both from how do you finance these sort of things and from a technology perspective as well. And I think, you know, some of the main things that came out of the analysis was, or out of the exercise of looking at how to finance this was, first of all, from a financier perspective, is to fully understand the degradation profile of the battery. And that means understanding how often and when and for how long, etc., the battery is going to be dispatched. And often that's a little bit unknown. So, you know, some work around how the power purchase agreement works, how the documents work, and then making certain assumptions in financial models around what that dispatch profile is going to be, then stressing it. And from that, making assumptions around degradation profiles. And why that is so important is that, you know, at some stage, the batteries will have to be augmented, and that comes with augmentation risk. And, you know, our financing tenors are far longer than when augmentation is going to be required. So, you know, you're looking at 15, 20 years tenor of funding. And so, you know, that introduces the next risk in terms of what do you do at year 8, depending on your dispatch profile, when your batteries need to be augmented. And the numerous risks that come into play there. And obviously you have the capex cost. What is the cost of batteries going to be at that point in time? And we can all make assumptions that the cost of batteries are going to go down, but actually nobody has a crystal ball. So how do you put in assumptions in the financial model in terms of the cost? And then obviously also exchange rate risk, because all of these batteries are coming from international, and there's going to be an exchange rate risk. And how do you factor that into the model? And how do you protect both debt and equity from those risks? So that is the second big risk that we had to look at. And there are numerous ways of doing that, and numerous sort of structuring and ways you can include that in models. You can either fund that up front, which is not the best solution, obviously. That would be more conservative. And then, you know, doing checks sort of every year, first of all, to check degradation. Is degradation happening according to what you've assumed? Is the exchange rate risk looking too big? Do you need to up that amount? What are battery prices doing? And so there are various sort of hedging instruments you can put in place, which only start at year 6 or 7. You can put in an augmentation facility, debt facility, or from cash flows, you can start reserving cash from, let's say, year 4 to factor for the risk of augmentation. So those are really the sort of things that we looked at. And then I think the other third risk is around supply chain. And because there's such demand for batteries, and that can lead to delays under the timelines that are set within documentations in terms of when construction operation date is supposed to happen, if your supply chain is delayed or if there are issues around that. And so really trying to factor in some float around that. And we've seen that coming up as quite a major risk when it comes to completing these large-scale utility projects. Thank you.
Thanks, Vincentia. That was, again, great intervention. I think all those three kinds of risks are very relevant, not just for South Africa, but I think even globally for that matter. We're seeing this in some of the work that we're doing outside of South Africa on BESS as well. So lots of similarities there. I would like to introduce now our fifth panelist, Marie-Louise van der Walt. Marie-Louise has worked in various capacities in the clean energy sector, and as an independent consultant for the past 15 years. She has done work for governments, NGOs, and development partners in South Africa and the region. She's done some phenomenal work and co-authored a policy study titled Assessing the Viability of Utility-Scale Energy Storage for the National Advisory Council on Innovation. I believe it was also on Richard's slide. So Marie-Louise, a question for you is more around, I think, the sort of planning challenges that lie ahead. From your work on the components of the African Continental Master Plan, how does South Africa fit into the bigger African picture? Are there any planning lessons that can be taken at this stage? And where are there potential areas for sort of regional collaboration for South Africa? Over to you, and welcome.
Good morning. Thank you, Swasti, and good morning, everyone. A mute moment. I think a first important point to recognize is that the African Continental Power System Master Plan has been ratified by the African Union ministers towards the end of last year. This means that this becomes African policy, and we'll be giving a binding direction to African countries and regions for their development trajectory. And South Africa, as one of the member states of the African Union, is therefore part of this decision or this policy making, but also takes direction from this policy, continental policy, in order to inform its own planning and detail policy development or policy setting going forward. I think another important realization around this continental master plan is that it looked at the broader ecosystem and clearly showed that an integrated system provides the most efficient solution, the most cost-effective solution for all the different countries and all the different regions, which means that it is the best route for everyone rather than an individualized plan that seems a more secure way to go. Which then also brings me to the second point, and that is that the plan was developed based on comprehensive modeling. So the comprehensive modeling specifically looking at a least cost energy solution or electricity solution that would guarantee energy security for the whole continent. And also aiming to realize a universal access and energy secure solution by 2040. So it really considered the best option or and the best mix of electricity solutions for Africa. I think in that it then sets a direction or dictates an energy mix and a diversified energy mix and a preferred energy mix that shows a development trajectory for the continent. And I think the interesting thing for me is that from within this diversified least cost solution, battery energy storage already emerges as one of the key components and a critical enabler of this plan. So a very interesting place for battery energy storage to take it in this iteration of the CMP and at a really relatively early stage in the evolution of battery energy storage. I think a second or an interesting part then is that each of the regions contribute towards this broader plan, and the Southern African Power Pool is expected to contribute the largest share of battery energy storage to the overall development, around 60% of the continental energy storage would sit within the SAP. We have 4 countries that are mainly expected to see investments in battery energy storage: Lesotho, Malawi, Tanzania, and South Africa. And of these, South Africa is expected to have about 70% of the capacity increase, or contribute about 70% of the capacity increase. So a significant role for South Africa to play. And if I look at the technology developments and price developments, and the increased understanding of the value of battery energy storage as an agile and versatile power system asset, I expect that this will contribute or increase even beyond this contribution. And then maybe just to say, the expectation in terms of the CMP for the continent is about between 25 and 32 gigawatts of battery energy storage by 2040. Of that, I think South Africa is currently expected to contribute about between 11 and 14 gigawatts. And if you look at our current planning trajectory, that is about 3 to 4 times what is in our baseline plans, probably just more than almost 3 times what is in the transmission development plan. And so, again, as quite achievable, South Africa making a significant contribution, and potentially the contribution of battery energy storage growing beyond that scope or that growth path. It's my help. Is it answering? Thank you.
Perfect. No, thanks, thanks, Mary-Louise. Those were really interesting answers and responses. And it's interesting to know the role that South Africa is going to play in the larger regional picture in terms of how this evolves. I just wanted to come in to remind the panelists to try and keep their interventions and limit them to 3 minutes at the max. We're actually running a little behind. And there are lots of questions that we still keen to ask. So for the next round, if you could just keep and limit it within 3 minutes, and if possible, even shorter, then that would be great. So I'll be very crisp in terms of the second round of questions so that, we can get through them faster. The next question, I think, Sherwin, I just wanted to bring in, because I think we were talking about like the various kinds of solutions that would be required around hybrids, around standalones. What are the different considerations and enabling factors for making these projects viable if you have to think about like hybrid versus standalone? Over to you.
Thanks, Swasti. I think, Swasti, we are seeing opportunities for both hybrid as well as standalone projects in South Africa. So, looking at hybrid projects, and the one I'd refer back to is the one we're working on now, which is Oya, which is, as you mentioned, hybridized with PV, wind, and battery. And this allows for increased dispatchability. So we're starting to see renewable hybrids based on the advent of battery energy storage, the variability of renewable starting to be reduced, and you're starting to see now becoming more dispatchable, especially as technology increases in terms of the number of cycles of batteries, etc. Also, to be able to provide grid stability and also cost efficiency over entire cost of a project in terms of being able to employ arbitrage to be able to provide solutions or power when you have more expensive time of use, peak tariffs, etc. On the standalone side, we're starting to see a lot of opportunities for BESS. These systems are able to be deployed quite quickly, quite flexible. So speed of implementation, capital deferment, where you have solutions where, for example, next to substations in very dense locations where you cannot put up a renewable plant or a power plant, but you're able to putting a small container of energy storage solutions to be able to defer, reduce notified maximum demand, defer or provide benefits of capital deferment where you don't have to now increase the entire infrastructure, but be able to manage your power more efficiently. So we're starting to see also ancillary services on standalone systems. So I think there's a place for both renewable hybrids as well as standalone BESS systems in South Africa.
Perfect. Thank you so much. That makes sense. I wanted to bring in Monday at this point, because I think like one of the things that is also emerging is that we will need a lot more collaboration between stakeholders. There's also a question related to this in the Q&A from the audience, which talks about just education among policymakers. So the question is, how can we think about like a platform, so as to say, for collaboration between policymakers, Eskom, and other best stakeholders? Where do we really start? If you could just give your comments on that, Mali, that would be super helpful.
Yeah, that's a that's a very difficult one, and definitely something that is required. So I think just as a start, we currently as grid engineers, you find that we don't have certain level of detailed modeling, which would then need to get upfront to actually have a detailed assessment of the impact of some of these resources. So to have a platform where we can have a way to share that, be it maybe it's certain versions of detailed modeling, that will definitely go a long way. But that is just one example. So there is I think EPRI has something that they call energy storage council or something like that, where they have different role players that come in and share information voluntary. So we need a similar version of the Energy Council within South African context, so that we all have this seamless exchange of information, especially for the purposes of modeling. And I have noted a few times where there is a need from the developer's side, a need to get some information about the grid, though it's at a certain detailed level. So that platform would need to look at the exchange of information in all these directions. Okay, so just to mention, I think my last point, I'm timing myself here. I see my 3 minutes is almost up. So we have SIE. They have already started paving the way. They have what they call energy storage chapter. I heard about the South African Energy Storage Association, and there are other role players. We've got NERSA, in terms of policy, academia, universities. We've got Eskom, we've got manufacturers, we've got now IPPs themselves. We need a platform where this information, and we can just sit down and say, what is it that we think can work for South African incorporated, not my needs or someone else's needs, but for everyone. So I think that is definitely something that is required. And we'll see how we can push maybe from the SIE side. I know that on Eskom side, there are activities that are trying to close the gap, but we do need to come together as all these different role players. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Monday. It's actually pretty heartening to know that there are these pieces that are moving, but there's still like an overarching sort of an open space that can then provide that sort of platform. And I agree, like the Storage Association and the council, all the respective players are doing great work in putting knowledge out. So that can be somewhat like aggregated on a common platform of sorts. Moving on, Bash, I would like to invite you for a very straightforward question. I think there are related questions that are coming in the chat as well. But it's a pretty straightforward question to try and understand how do really grid batteries compare with other load shedding mitigation interventions like standby diesel generators? And what are some of the methods of procurement considered? Pros and cons of both. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, I think the audience and the panelists have spoken to some of these elements, and some of it will be pretty obvious. So I won't labor those points. But I mean, aside for the obvious benefits that with the diesel generator, you're not able to operate it in arbitrage mode or use any other, there's no other revenue model for them other than just for standby generation. Whereas with battery storage, you have the opportunity of using it for myriads of other use cases as already articulated before. And if you put even putting in environmental impact aside and the life cycle operational cost that might be accumulated with diesel generation, it also doesn't like low loads. So, there's technically some other issues with generators where it doesn't like low load conditions for long period of time. There's operational efficiency points or bands in which it would operate perhaps like around 70% load. And that wouldn't necessarily be achieved. It's difficult to size it for the load profile and ensure that the level of mitigation sort of falls within that band at the same time. So I think the audience is well aware of some of the different comparisons. But as I said before, when you're comparing these two solutions, it's difficult to monetize the benefits. And that's why there's talk of like the levelized value of storage and those other metrics need to come in to really justify or strengthen the business case of battery storage over diesel generation. So when it comes to procurement for the city side, and you might respond to some of the questions in the chat, is that the city has initially looked at piloting it on our own build. So we would own the asset. So in terms of the operations, it's complete within our control. If we needed to sort of, you're looking at a containerized system, lift it up and put it in another location, that's some possibility in the future, potentially, if we really have a situation where it's not fit for that particular site. The other methods of procurement, although much less capital intensive, are complex, as I stated before, like Vincentia would have said that the power purchase agreements for structuring it for like a load shedding sort of model would be quite difficult. You would need some sort of revenue stream, so a minimum dispatch would have to be offered to the other party in the PPA. So for us to structure it's difficult. For municipalities, the MFMA, the Municipal Finance Management Act, and the supply chain policy is actually what is really the most difficult part to navigate. So commercially, technically, we can find a workable model, but to bring that to fit into the sausage machine of the supply chain process is very difficult. I mean, even if you're looking at an own build solution and you put out to the market as an EPC, asking for EPC to build it, you don't want to necessarily compare purely on price because there would be certain levels of depth of discharge and performance criteria that would be different between offerings. And to bring that into something that you can almost robotically assess against functionality criteria while also addressing a price comparative model is challenging. So unless there was some objective levelized value of storage that we could benchmark them all against, although like our preference, procurement, preferential scoring and those kind of things don't really dovetail well with that. They used to prices. So the supply chain policy and what we have are very good at with, I mean, it's evolved dramatically and we're doing a lot for the city of Cape Town to mature that. However, innovation in the supply chain space is very difficult. So, you got something that was designed for procuring pencils quickly and at scale, and you want to use the same methodology if you wanted to purchase a nuclear plant. That's really the issue there when it comes to procurement. But yeah, and I haven't touched on a lot of the pros, but I think the cons are what's more outstanding.
Yeah, thanks, Vash. It's always good to talk about the cons because that's what leads to opportunities. So I think that's still nevertheless very useful. I think your intervention actually pivots neatly into the next question that I had for Vincentia. Since you mentioned like some of the challenges that can have come across with procurement and the financing challenges around that. So Vincentia, for you, I wanted to understand that for local municipalities, Are there any potential novel and inventive ways to then approach best finance, based on the intervention that Bash made? It would be interesting to know from you what could be the potential novel ways then.
Great, thank you. I think, yeah, it's quite a difficult question. And besides all of the MFMA points that have already just been mentioned, it's a key question that we keep getting asked, and not only just on battery financing and battery scale use, but also on just renewable energies and how do these municipalities go about procuring these sort of interventions. And I think there are some solutions that we're looking at. Specifically for battery, some of the ideas and some of the thinking that we've been looking at is around, very short tenor asset financing, lease financing, where you're not sort of relying on a 15-year tenor or 20-year tenor. And as long as you can make an argument that if your battery is your security, you can redeploy it somewhere else, or there's some other market for it, but still quite hard. I think some of the other options that we've looked at, some of the other structuring ideas, is around looking at potential receivables that the municipalities get, ring fencing that into specific account, which does create some comfort and some level of security for financiers if you're looking at a longer tenor of financing for the battery. And then thirdly, which is something we've been working on quite a bit, is around bringing in DFIs. And if the ability for a DFI to provide a sort of a first loss structure, some sort of guarantee, which then crowds in funding from commercial banks to allow for municipalities to also benefit from these sort of interventions. So obviously that does take time, and it's not easy, but there are some ideas floating around. And yeah, it is a little bit more complex and a little bit more time consuming.
Thanks, Chinzia. Yeah, makes sense. Last question probably from my side to Marie-Louise, and then we can open it up for the audience questions if there are any outstanding. We're trying our best to address them here as we go along. Marie-Louise, from your work on battery study for the National Advisory Council on Innovation, and from the recent developments, where do you think the priorities now lie? And what are the best levers for grid battery deployment in South Africa at the moment? I thought that's a neat way to tie it all back up. So over to you, Marie-Louise.
Thank you, Swasti. So for the NACI study, we specifically looked at energy storage more broadly, so not only at battery energy storage, and we looked at the viability at policy levers to enhance the viability for energy storage. And we looked at 5 different levers: policy, regulation, procurement, tariffs, and incentives. And so if I look at what we considered at the time and where things are at the moment, I think I'd say the most important lever still at this point is to help create a market structure where energy storage systems can access more revenue. So can monetize and be compensated for more of the services that they provide. And I think in saying that, I echo what almost every other panelist here has said. I know Sherwin started with that, the importance of value stacking or revenue stacking in creating a business case and a viable business for battery energy storage. And I think if that can be achieved, there's a lot of other things that can be done to enhance an enabling environment, but if that can be achieved, the private sector has clearly demonstrated their capability to respond to the market signals and to respond to a market that is enabling to them. So that is, I'd say, the most important thing that can be done. Thank you.
Thank you. That was an excellent point. I think there's a lot more solutioning that can be done from the private sector side, but of course, then regulations need to create that enabling environment to enable, better revenue returns for things like ancillary service and other services that BESS may provide. So with that, I think we've come officially to the close of the panel discussion, but I think there are some questions that came in from the audiences. I think we've tried to answer most of them. There is a question on StatComs. I'm not sure if somebody from the panel would like to take that up. How do StatComs compare with BESS for grid support services specifically, and why would you choose a BESS over a StatCom? I'm not sure if Monday you could take that. Might be a good question for you, but feel free to jump in case somebody like Vash would also like to answer that. Yeah.
Right. Thanks, Swasti. So yes, StatComs, yes, those are we use those in our grid a lot to support the network in terms of, voltage and reactive power support. But I think we just need to remember that they don't have a power source as the batteries would. So, batteries play a role that is more than what the StatCom can do, in a sense that you can use it, you can deploy it for frequency control, as was mentioned in many cases. So when you have high frequency events, you can deploy it as a load. And I think in our system currently, we really have started experiencing those quite a lot, the high frequency events. So meaning that we at times, within very, very short space of time, we need something that will act as a load. And again, at some point you need something that's going to act as a generator. But then the StatCom can only control what happens, in terms of the reactive power, in terms of the voltage, which is basically what the inverter can do, but it just doesn't have the storage part. Thanks.
Thanks, Monday. Perfect. Moving on, I see there is another question for Marie-Louise. It's a fairly straightforward question, Marie-Louise. The Clyde is asking if there is an overview that you could share on the quantum of the various generation technologies that were found to be optimal in your least cost model for 2040 Africa. I believe it would be in the final report, so maybe you can just allude to that in your intervention.
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Clyde. I can't remember the exact quantums off the top of my head, but the report is available on the nepa.org website. All the specific resource studies, the contributions for each of the technologies, so geothermal, wind, solar PV, they're all there in their specific details, and then the consolidated or synthesis report for CMP is also available. So it's on nepa.org, and I think it's under publications, but I'm sure we can also share the link to you afterwards.
Thank you. Perfect. There's another question from Bronwyn. I'm not sure if the question is for Vincentia, but they're asking if you work with Power Africa as the DFI. I think it's a very straightforward question. Maybe you want to take that up?
So just to confirm, what was the question? Do we work with, can you just repeat
Power
it?
Africa. Do you work with Power Africa?
Yes, we do. Yeah, we work with them. We work with all the DFIs, got really good relationships. And as mentioned, there are some solutions that we're looking at with most of them.
Perfect. I think there is one last outstanding question. Again, I believe, Molly, this might be for you, but for others, in case you want to intervene, please feel free to do that. It's a slightly long question, but I'll try to synthesize it a little bit. How much more BESS can be added before the wires are full? What are the plans to add more BESS? And is there no more BESS allowed for in the IRP? What are we doing to resolve this?
So, yeah, I was just trying to read the question now. I see it there. So the energy mix, there are different resources that are, as per the IRP, that, you know, are required to run the system optimally. So batteries and wires being heavily loaded, I think you cannot really count on batteries alone to actually take care of that load. Or maybe to take care of the generation, or either way. So we are looking at things like hydrogen as well, you know, as part of the energy mix. And we are now, I think the the IPP office has really started asking for dispatchable plants as well, to ensure that we don't find ourselves in a corner where we sweat the wires beyond the economic operating limits. But the RP is there, as was reflected. Well, it is still under review, you know, which is an indication that, you know, this is how much amount of batteries we anticipate to need on the system. As also was referred, there is a view from Eskom transmission via the TDPs to say this is what we feel that the system requires. So I think, you know, both parties will need to find each other at some point, and we'll have, you know, a 10-year plan that this is, you know, what we require to run a secure system for the next 10 years. What happens after that, we can't really know, but at least we know that within the next 10 years, we've got these documents that are a guide. But I think I'll come back to this question. I just want to read it more in detail. I was just reading the first line, but that's what I can say at the moment. Thanks.
Perfect. So I think just to wrap this all up, I think we've got through most of the questions. If any of the panelists would just like to give a rapid fire answer to the last question, what are the factors that really give you hope for the development of the sector in South Africa? It's an open-ended question, so please feel free to share just like a 30-second quick rapid answer so that we can just tie it all back. So what gives you hope for the sector? Maybe we can start with Sherwin then, and go in the same order.
Swasti, I think, I mean, in wrapping up, the opportunity is huge, right? I mean, we're starting to see the need is, firstly, it's a matched demand of supply and demand. There's a huge demand that as South Africa is sitting in terms of reducing load shedding, stabilizing the grid, and allowing for growth of our economy. At the same time, you know, this has been favorably received by battery energy storage and renewable systems in terms of their technological advances, in terms of number of cycles for batteries, round trip efficiency, different technologies now becoming commercially viable. And at the same time, on the renewable side, with cost plummeting, etc. So these now are starting to become quite apt solutions. So I expect to see a steady increase and a marked increase in terms of energy storage and hybrid systems. If you just look at the energy storage systems that's been implemented from last year to this year, it's staggering. It's significant, and that trajectory will continue. So I think we're well placed as a country, as well as from a technology perspective, to harness and beneficiate these solutions. So exciting times ahead.
Perfect. Thank you. Monday, would you like to come in next?
Yes. So just before I answer to that, I think, yeah, I did address the question from I think it's Etienne. In terms of the quantities that we are looking for, you know, that we can have that can be absorbed by the grid, and we can only review the plans every time those plans, you know, in the frequencies that the IRP, the TDP, and other master plans are reviewed. But at the moment, I think those are the plans that we can really run with. So secondly, the question is what, sorry, can you please repeat the question, Swasti? The one.
It's a very simple question. What brings you hope for the sector, for the development of the sector in South Africa?
Yes, no, yeah, there is hope. The sector is required. The grid really needs the support of the batteries. You know, especially with the ramp up of renewable energy, we need as much batteries as we can get. And there is, I think it's just, you know, to fix all the little things that we need to go through this kind of learning curve, you know, getting all these collaborations going, you know, sharing the information, ensuring that we've got grid codes that are polished and the technical standards that are ready for use. So I am definitely sure there is a brighter future for this industry. Thanks.
Excellent. So that's good to know. Bash, would you like to come in next?
I think from a more of a philosophical point of view, I think you know, humans with the right incentives and which is growing, the natural market forces and environmental forces are there to push us toward a solution that's more sustainable, and I think batteries will be part of that. Even if batteries are not the end solution, there will be a mix that we will find that's gonna that we will resolve. Even if we go past that, you know, 1.5 degree mark, I'm sure that we'll find a way through carbon sequestration or whatever combination of technology to even bring it back. So I think people mustn't have a sense of doom and gloom that we're too late or we've missed the boat. I think there's still a lot of runway ahead of us.
Perfect. Vincentia, would you like to come and share your thoughts?
Thanks. Yes. I mean, I think it's just sort of the scale of the opportunity that's here. And also, you know, what we've seen historically over a very short period of time in terms of the willingness for private sector to collaborate, for the huge sort of move towards thinking about innovatively how you look at these sort of transactions or how you look at this technology. And so, you know, we see it on a daily basis, the willingness, there's a depth of capital thinking from a financing, banking perspective, there's a huge amount of capital, huge amount of appetite. And so, you know, there's definitely positives here for sure.
Thank you. Marie-Louise, would you like to share your thoughts as well?
Certainly. So I'll take a far more, I guess, global view on this, and that is that there's such a phenomenal amount or number of intelligence and research and effort going into the whole sector of energy storage at the moment. And if we look at what happened with the moonshot or the sunshot initiative many years ago and what they did for solar PV and the development around that, I think we have a fascinating route and journey ahead of us for energy storage.
Excellent. Thank you so much all for sharing your thoughts. And it's good to see, I think, that almost universally, we believe that there's lots of opportunities, lots of capital awaiting. Of course, there's going to be challenges involved, but then the road in future, there's light at the end of the tunnel. With that, I will turn it back to Richard. Molly, I see your hand is up. Did you have another thought that you would like to share? Or is this a legacy hand?
No, sorry. I think just to quickly talk to the comment or the question by someone called Toby Loba. So they are asking if there is a comprehensive list of energy storage projects that are currently on our grid. I think it's something we can look into. And also the question asks about the lessons that have been learned. I think SAE is also working on a webinar or a seminar to take stock of some of the learning curves that we have gone through as part of deployment of some of the early battery energy storage projects. So I just wanted to talk to that. Otherwise, thank you. Thanks, Chair. Thanks for the opportunity.
Okay, perfect. I see there's actually, unfortunately, one more legacy hand, so I'll just bring that question up. I think it's from Etienne. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing the name correctly, but there is a question on just the advancements on other chemistries, because lithium ion currently almost universally holds the best market share. But any prospects on future development, any ideas around that that the panelists would like to share? I think Richard already spoke about vanadium, which is again an interesting chemistry for a country like South Africa. But in case you wanted to come in and share your thoughts on the potential advancements that can be expected and how soon, really. And with that, I think that last question, I'll probably turn it back to Richard. It's up for grabs for the panel. Anybody who would like to come in?
So, sorry, Swasti, I was reading another question here by Etienne about current lithium ion has 100% best market share. I'm not sure if that's the one that has been responded to yet. Okay, so I think there are other chemistries below flow batteries. Vanadium redox flow was mentioned specifically. The City of Cape Town also, when we were doing our technology screening, that's one of the ones that came up. There are some other notable mentions like some other titanium type of chemistries. I mean, lithium ion now it's lithium iron phosphate, so there might be a little bit more improvement on the actual lithium chemistry and combinations. But yeah, I see I think there are some emerging technologies that everyone's been waiting for. Maybe the titanium combination might be one that might come to the market, and it probably will be used in space and other applications more reliably before it's tested at utility scale. I mean, that's how PV eventually came to these kind of applications. So there might be stuff on the horizon, but I think in the near term, I haven't seen much more than the flow batteries and the lithium-based technologies.
Perfect. Thanks, Vash, for addressing that. And with that, I think I'll turn it back to Richard, my colleague from ILC. Richard, I will request you to close the session. And again, thank you for organizing this. It's been a wonderful discussion. Back to you.
Excellent. I hope everyone can hear me. Just two more thoughts on Etienne's question before we close. One of the things we have put in the report is around technology lock-in. The future, none of us have a crystal ball. We don't know exactly how it's going to pan out. So any sort of support for batteries and other storage technology should be done in a way that allows for new market entrants. I mean, globally, there are a lot of research labs doing all sorts of interesting things. And who knows, in 3 or 4 years, there might be something which is much better. And we don't want to have set the whole system up so that you can't take advantage of those. But you also have to move forward with what we've got. And at the moment, all the current tenders, whether it's from Eskom or what the renewables developers are building with their facilities, it's almost all lithium ion for now. Although it is of interest, and we put in our part 1 report, the largest battery which is slated to be developed in South Africa by Earth and Wire is actually a liquid metal battery from Ambri. But that's done in a sort of private capacity. It's not done through an auction or anything. So there are other battery chemistries, and also there are the storage technologies. You mustn't forget about those. I mean, pumped storage is important, but it takes a long time to build. There's thermal storage. There's lots of other options. We are just dealing with the specific question of what do we do with batteries right now, because they've arrived, people are interested, and we want to try and do them in the best way possible. So hopefully our report has touched on that a little bit. It is a big topic. We have only scratched the surface. Hopefully events like this can get people thinking about this more, not just nationally, but also at municipal level. So with that, I just want to say a huge thank you to all our panelists. I know everyone's busy. They've tolerated all my questions, setting this up, and thank you so much. And also a big thanks to Swasti for managing everything today. And just more broadly for the report, I mean, I interviewed over 70 people. That was a lot of time people gave, and they were very willing to help. And, you know, that we were talking about hope earlier, like the fact that everyone was so willing to talk about it is great. I think that's what we need. We know we need more information on this. We're trying to do our little part, and hopefully we will do more work on this in the future. So if anyone is interested in collaborating, just reach out to us. We do have some more ideas for future storage projects. But with that, thank you for attending. You can email us directly if you have any questions about the report. And yeah, we'll keep you updated. Those who registered, as in everyone listening, you'll get a link to the recording and the report as well. So thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day.